I assumed it was just another typical family day. This is the kind of trip that includes my daughter laughing in the back seat, a stop for ice cream, and laughter in the car. However, his phone only displayed one notification that evening. All of a sudden, I was no longer the woman creating a future. For years, I was the one who fell into deceit. And now I'm the one attempting to regain my breathing. It's odd how typical everything appeared to be that morning. When I awoke to the gentle sound of my daughter's breathing beside me, the sun had already begun to peek through the drapes. She frequently did this after having a nightmare, and at some point during the night, she had crawled into our bed. I grinned as I glanced at her small face. Her curly hair was a tangled mess, and she draped one arm across my chest as though she owned the space. It didn't bother me. To be honest, I felt like I had everything I could possibly want at times like that. When I came downstairs, Brandon, my fiancé, was already in the kitchen. He was humming softly to himself while flipping pancakes and pouring coffee. The house smelled, and it seemed like one of those mornings that people only pretend to enjoy on Instagram. He said, "You look beautiful today," grinned at me, bent down, and planted a peck on my cheek. 10 years. We had been together for that long. 10 years. We made it work despite everything: financial strain, job upheavals, the chaos of becoming new parents, moving in together after graduation, and meeting in college. I thought so. Even though the wedding kept getting postponed due to his job, my schedule, and life, I didn't question it because we had been engaged for more than a year. That didn't bother me at all. Together, we had a daughter. We owned a home. We shared dreams and groceries, as well as Netflix passwords. In my heart, we were already married. So when Brandon proposed we take the day off and go to the lake with our daughter, I said yes without hesitation. The three of us packed towels and sunscreen and set out like any other excited little family. At least I assured myself that we were content. We watched our daughter gather rocks as if they were treasures, played in the water, and took goofy photos. When she grew tired, Brandon carried her on his shoulders, allowed her to climb on his back, and chased her around. People grinned at us as if we were the epitome of happiness and tranquility. I accepted them without question. I desired to. That evening, after we arrived home and put our daughter to bed, I sat on the bed, fulfilled, feeling filled. Not just from the pizza we ordered, but from the calm delight of the day. We were filled. Brandon was next to me, half watching a movie, half scrolling on his phone. I leaned against him, my head on his shoulder. He kissed the top of my head absent-mindedly, then got up to grab a beer. At that moment, it occurred. On the armrest, his phone came to life. There was a subtle vibration. Only one. I had no intention of looking. I wasn't spying. I wasn't the paranoid, jealous kind. But I had to look over for some reason, whether it was instinct or fate. I didn't recognize the name. The preview stated, "Last night I looked wonderful. I am excited to meet you again." My heart stopped beating. Then it began anew, moving so quickly that I could hardly think. The world seemed to have suddenly swung sideways, and I felt lightheaded. I gazed at the phone as though a closer look might alter my perception. I grinned as Brandon came back. I did smile. I gave his phone to him. "You got a message," I responded nonchalantly. His expression changed for a brief, barely perceptible moment as he looked down. It wasn't panic. He was too good for that. It was only a brief moment before his expression returned to normal. He shrugged and said, "Oh yeah, it's probably just someone from work." The lie between us abruptly ended. The message wasn't what mattered, but how he delivered it, dismissing it without questioning its content or sender. But it did, and it was more important than he could have imagined. That night, I listened to his breathing as I lay in bed with him, wondering who he was, the man who made pancakes in the morning and bid my daughter a peaceful night, or the man who was messaging someone else about their relationship. I simply lay there in quiet, looking at the ceiling while my heart slowly broke apart inside my chest. I didn't sleep. I was the first to wake up the following morning. As I stood in the hallway between their rooms, I felt caught between what I thought my life was and what I feared it had become. The house was quiet, peaceful even, with Brandon still asleep and my daughter curled up in her room, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit as if it held all the safety in the world. I needed to know the truth, and even though my heart was heavy, my mind was sharp. The message from the previous night didn't just appear, it ignited something within me. leaving me unable to ignore it or resume my normal behavior. So I did something I never would have thought to do. I took Brandon's phone while he was taking a shower. I used to believe that he had nothing to hide because it wasn't secured and he never bothered with a passcode, but now I see it differently. Perhaps he was simply sure that I wouldn't peek and that I trusted him too much to even think about it. I regret being correct about that. I launched his messaging applications, first the standard ones, then the unusual ones, like Instagram, Snapchat, WhatsApp, and even some dating apps, some of which I was unaware were still in use. And what I discovered, there were several women involved. The flirtatious message I saw last night wasn't the only thing. There were hundreds, if not more. Some were brief, superficial, lighthearted conversations with women from unknown places, but others were deep, personal, explicit, and full of things he had never even mentioned to me. There were pictures, voice notes, videos, compliments, promises, and meeting arrangements. Some of these conversations had been going on for weeks, while others had been going on for years. One thread in particular caught his attention, Melissa, with whom he had been in contact for 2 years. 2 years. That is a relationship, not a passing fancy or an error. I read messages from him about our future, how things are complicated right now, but that soon he'd have more time. He told her he loved her, that he wished they could wake up together, that he missed her body, and that he missed her body. He had forged a new life with her, brimming with secrets and revelations I never expected. What's the worst? In one communication, he claimed that our daughter was the reason he stayed with me, adding that although I was good for stability, the passion was long gone. Even though my hands were trembling and my eyes were burning, I continued to scroll because I had to see everything and experience the pain completely so that I wouldn't later justify myself or tell myself that I overreacted or imagined it. I received what I wanted, the truth. I cherish every lie, every picture, and every phrase. I felt numb, as if the emotional part of me had completely shut down to protect what was left of me, and I wasn't even crying when I finally put the phone down. Minutes later, Brandon entered the room with a towel around his waist, humming a tune as if nothing had occurred, and went down to give me a good morning kiss. I twisted my face slightly so he struck my cheek instead. He didn't notice, or perhaps he did and acted as though he didn't. I really looked at him, and for the first time in a decade, he seemed unfamiliar to me. He held my hand in hospital waiting rooms, murmured to me on our daughter's first night home, and I reflected on all the birthdays, anniversaries, vacations, and evenings we'd spent snuggled up together. And I questioned how much of it had been a performance and how much had actually happened. Brandon was inside preparing lunch while I sat in the backyard later that day, watching my daughter play with her toys. We must have appeared to be a picture-perfect family from the outside, but on the inside, I was inconsolable. My chest constricted so much that it was difficult for me to breathe as I watched my daughter giggle at something ridiculous, her tiny voice echoing across the lawn. I was able to keep myself together because of her. I couldn't have screamed or confronted him yet because of her. I needed to develop a plan. I needed to keep waiting long enough to see what would happen next. And I needed to protect her. In actuality, though, I wasn't even sure where to start. In the days that followed, I lived my life as if it were a ghost. I completed my tasks flawlessly, including making breakfast, packing lunches, kissing my daughter's forehead and wishing her a wonderful day, answering work emails, folding laundry, and grinning when Brandon entered the room. But I was falling apart on the inside. When I saw the past for what it was, I was horrified by how many clues I had missed. Every observation I made and every habit we formed seemed to be based on a falsehood. On other late nights, he claimed to be working extra hours, but he would return home smelling like someone else's perfume. On several weekends, he claimed to be going out with friends or needed space, but he would return home aloof, preoccupied, or strangely silent. At times, he kept his phone face down during dinner, moved his screen away when I entered the room, and took calls outdoors while claiming to be under work stress. And I had faith in him, or rather, I wanted to think he was real. Because I loved him, because we had a kid, because acknowledging that something was wrong would mean embracing the possibility that everything I had worked so hard to create may fall apart. and because the truth would have been too painful. I then made up excuses, justifications, and stories for myself. He's worn out. There is pressure on him. He's still getting used to being a father. He simply needs room. I got so proficient at defending my preferred version of our relationship that I totally overlooked the one that was actually taking place. Now that I had revealed the truth, I could no longer conceal it. What lay beneath was not only treachery, but a pattern of protracted, intentional betrayal with deeper roots than I had ever suspected. About a year ago, I began to recall a certain evening when I was cleaning his car and discovered a tiny earring inside. It wasn't mine or my daughter's, but when I asked him, he chuckled and said it most likely belonged to a coworker he gave a lift to, and I believed him. He was pleasant, self-assured, and composed, and he had a way of making me feel as though my worries were unfounded and that I was overanalyzing everything. Why wouldn't I? It was grooming, not only manipulation. He gradually caused me to doubt my intuition. And the most inhumane aspect? He still bought me flowers on anniversaries, held my hand in public, kissed me each night, and stated he couldn't imagine his life without me. How many times did I see what I wanted to see when I looked into his eyes? And now all I could see was the image of someone who had shielded themselves by using my trust. After putting our daughter to sleep one night, I sat in bed and looked across the room at him. He was brushing his teeth and humming as usual, just like he did that morning at the lake and every other day before I found out. He turned to me and grinned. "What?" he inquired. I shook my head and muttered, "Nothing," but I was screaming inside. I couldn't decide which stung more, the fact that I had allowed him to lie to me, or the fact that he was so skilled at it. As he turned off the lights and slipped in next to me, I curled up on my side of the bed with my back to him. In a few minutes, his breathing stabilized, as if he had no trouble falling asleep. For hours, I gazed into the blackness. The silence becomes unbearable when the lies start to unravel. You begin to question how much of your existence was based on sand when you eventually realize the reality. Finding out about the betrayal wasn't the most difficult aspect. Pretending I didn't know it when I woke up, each day was the most difficult part. Sitting across from someone who broke your heart and still asking him how he wants his eggs in the morning, watching him embrace your daughter, and feeling your throat tighten knowing that he's leading a double life. While your child clings to the idea of a wonderful father, it's a weird kind of hell, really. I began to perform the actions as if I were a machine. Daycare drop-off, grinning at the other mothers, grocery shopping, dinner, story time, bath time, dishes, laundry, and so on. I was carrying a secret so heavy that it felt like it was compressing my ribs. It would be real once I said it aloud, and I wasn't ready for the real thing yet. So I couldn't tell anyone yet, not even my best friend, my mother, or my sister. As an alternative, I repeatedly asked myself the same question: do I leave or do I stay? And both responses worried me. If I stayed, I would be betraying myself, teaching my daughter that stability is more important than self-respect, that a woman's job is to keep things together, even when she's falling apart, and that love is swallowing your grief and putting up with falsehoods. But where would I go if I left? I hadn't lived alone for so long that I wasn't even sure who I would be without him. We had a mortgage, a shared car, a child, and a life that we had built together for 10 years. How would I pay the rent? Who would take care of me when our daughter fell ill? What if she sobbed for him at night? What if I let her down? That fear consumed me. There were silent, terrible times when I questioned whether I should forgive him, whether I was exaggerating, whether other people had it worse, whether it was only emotional cheating rather than physical, and why flirting texts to other people after 2 years with one lady didn't indicate he didn't love me. But I knew better in my heart. This is not what love does. Love doesn't just happen. Love does not send late-night pictures. Love does not create an alternate life with someone else. For 2 years in a row, love doesn't lie every day. I had to remind myself of that repeatedly, as if it were a mantra. I didn't want my daughter to hear me cry in the shower on some nights, and I didn't want Brandon to ask me what was wrong, because if he did, I wouldn't know how to stop myself. I continued to patch up the cracks in my mask. One night, I can still clearly recall, after a long day, Brandon offered to stay up with our daughter, who was ill and had a fever. For a brief moment, I saw the man I used to love, the one who could be soft, loving, and present. And I detested that. I detested the fact that, despite everything, I still had feelings for him, that I still had hope that he could change, and that perhaps, just maybe, if I faced him, he would apologize, beg, and promise to make things right. What if he didn't, though? What if I was gaslighted? Could he accuse me? What if he told me it wasn't a big problem while looking me in the eye? That was what scared me the most. I didn't want to lose any more than I had already lost. Nevertheless, I was losing myself every day that I remained silent. I started writing everything down, including a journal, a plan, a list of all the messages I came across, names, dates, and emotions. I wasn't sure what I would do with it yet, but it gave me a sense of control and prevented me from completely losing my mind. And each time I embraced my baby, I muttered to myself, "You need to be strong for yourself as well as for her." Despite her ignorance of the situation, what I decided to do next would teach her. One Google search was the first step. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, laptop open, late one night after everyone had gone to bed, and typed the words that made me shiver: "How to break up with your partner after cheating." The screen softly gleamed in front of me, reflecting a future for which I was ill-prepared but desperately needed. I read articles, browsed forums, and came across accounts of women who had done it, some with children, others without, some distraught, some furious, all broken in some way, but still standing. And that's when I discovered something I hadn't previously allowed myself to believe. I wasn't alone by myself. Other women had been on this path, experiencing the same betrayal, fear, and paralysis, and they had survived. They were not unharmed, but they were stronger, clearer, and wiser. I continued to read, took notes, bookmarked legal sites, investigated our state's custody laws, discovered my rights as an unmarried partner with a child, and saved the number of a family law attorney to my phone under a false identity. I know it sounds insignificant, but every step felt like 100-pound weight being lifted. Every preparation seemed like a silent act of defiance. A silent pledge to myself: "You will not be stuck forever." I started stashing money. Not much. I have a few dollars here and there from grocery trips or forgotten Venmo transfers. I opened a new bank account under my name only. I found a storage box and hid my journal, copies of messages and important documents, birth certificates, tax records, and medical info for our daughter. Brandon was unaware. He continued to kiss me goodbye in the morning, to joke about with me at dinner, and to browse through his phone late at night while I sat next to him, acting as though I didn't know. I did this because I wasn't sure what he would do if he suspected I was planning to leave. He wasn't physically aggressive. However, he had perfected emotional control. I recalled the times he had made me feel foolish for asking him questions, how he could manipulate a situation so that I had to apologize, how he could become aloof and cold for days, punishing me with silence, and how he could cry real tears and claim he had never harmed me. I was at last learning how to overcome the gift of manipulation that he possessed. One afternoon, after dropping my kid off at preschool, I chose to sit in the car outside a little law office for half an hour, just breathing, without going inside because I wasn't ready. I then took off in my car. That was a win in and of itself, like raising a flag in uncharted territory and telling the cosmos, "I'm nearly there." The question persisted, though. What if I was overreacting? What if I were doing nothing except destroying my daughter's family? What if being a single mother was too much for me? But then I would think of the messages, the lies, the other lady, Melissa, and how he came home to me as if nothing had happened, telling her he loved her. I'd recall that I hadn't ruined anything. He had. I was now only attempting to avoid the fallout. After putting our daughter to bed each night, I would sit in silence in the living room and ask myself the same question: when? What time would I depart? How soon would I tell him? At what point would I quit acting? Despite not knowing the answer yet, I sensed its impending arrival, akin to a distant storm or a shift within me that grew louder, more potent, and harder to ignore. I wasn't prepared to set the home on fire. However, I had located the matches. I had them in my hand as well. The moment wasn't particularly dramatic. There were no shrieking matches, broken dishes or heartfelt admissions. I only have a pair of socks. On the floor of our daughter's room are tiny pink socks featuring unicorns. When I came in after doing the laundry, I found Brandon sitting cross-legged on the floor, helping her put together a puzzle. She was laughing and he was making silly noises for each piece. The sun shone through the window, bathing them in a warm glow. And for a brief moment, I experienced a sense of calm that I hadn't had in weeks. Then I noticed those socks, though. She wore them the night I discovered the messages, the same ones she wore when we returned from the lake, the day I came to terms with the fact that my world was not what I had assumed it was. All of a sudden, I was out of breath. This was a performance, not a state of peace. He continued to put on the mask of the devoted partner and play the part of the loving father. He continued to reside in the house of a woman he had lied to on a daily basis for years, and I continued to act as though I didn't know. I excused myself, walked to the bathroom, and silently closed the door while holding on to the edge of the sink until my knuckles were white. That's when I realized I was unable to continue. I couldn't keep lying to myself. I couldn't keep putting the confrontation off until the perfect time that would never arrive. I couldn't keep stroking my daughter's hair and smiling at her father, as if he hadn't betrayed everything we stood for. Because waiting would always be justified. There is another holiday, another birthday, and yet another justification. But instead of safeguarding my daughter, my silence was teaching her terrible lessons, such as that a woman should keep silent when she is hurt, that love is endurance rather than respect, and that betrayal is just another thing you grow accustomed to. No, that shouldn't be her legacy. After Brandon went to bed that night, I stayed up in the kitchen and stared out the window at the moon, my heart thumping like a war drum, writing down all the things I wanted to say, all the questions I wanted to ask, and all the truths I had gathered like shards of broken glass. After I was done, I slipped the folded page into my journal. I had no intention of giving it to him just yet. However, the words had to be visible to me, to be aware of their authenticity. I thought I was authentic. The part of me that believed we were in love might have quietly faded away in the background. However, a stronger person was replacing her. The following morning, I called. Despite my shaky fingers, I dialed the number during my lunch break and stepped outside into the crisp fall air, pressing call nonetheless. Hello, my name is family law attorney Angela Martinez. Hey, I think I need to talk to someone about leaving my fiancé. We have a daughter, I interjected, my voice trembling. A kind, firm voice said, Of course, let's schedule a time to talk. You're not alone, she said after a moment of stillness. Something inside of me broke and then rebuilt after hearing those words. They are not alone. I hadn't spoken the words out in weeks, and for the first time, I wasn't simply living in my thoughts. I was reaching out and making it real. I tucked my daughter in, whispered that she was secure and loved, and, with tears in my eyes, closed the door after kissing her goodnight as I always did. I was excited because everything would be different shortly. Additionally, for the first time since learning the truth, that no longer frightened me. The night before, I didn't get much sleep. I rolled over, reviewing all I intended to say, picturing his every conceivable response. Would he deny it? Become irate? Cry? Apologize? Or try to distort things, like he always did? I had no idea, but I did know this. I no longer felt afraid. The truth has already destroyed what I thought we had. It was time to rectify the situation. For once, the home was quiet, just the two of us on a Sunday morning after our daughter spent the previous evening at my mom's. Brandon was brewing coffee in the kitchen while singing an old pop tune, as if it were any other day. I took time to observe him. He was the father of my child, the man I had loved for a decade, the man who taught me how to parallel park, and the man who used to leave small notes in my purse just to cheer me up. And yet, the same man who gave me a goodnight kiss looked me in the eyes and then secretly sent messages to other women. I took a seat at the table. I whispered softly, Brandon, are you free to speak? With his mug in hand, he glanced over his shoulder and said, Yeah, sure. Is everything okay? Just sit down, I said, nodding. Unaware that the atmosphere between us had shifted, he sat across from me, drinking his coffee, and raised an eyebrow without arguing. A deep sigh escaped my lips. I understand, I replied. He scowled. You know what? About Melissa, about the dating apps, about the messages, about the pictures. I met his gaze directly and said, It's all about the pictures. Halfway to his lips, the cup halted and his face froze. Quiet. His mind was racing, trying to figure out how much I had seen, deciding whether to come clean or lie, and attempting to figure out the angle that would save him. At last, he put down the cup and said, All right, I think we should have a calm conversation about this. He assumed a calm, controlled, and neutral stance, as if he was trying to resolve a misunderstanding over coffee and gentle conversation. I shook my head and said, No, I don't need you to explain anything. I've seen enough. You've been with her for 2 years. You've read it all. There are others, too, right? He clenched his jaw and remained silent. I muttered, That's what I thought. Listen, it wasn't supposed to be like this. Things got complicated. I didn't plan, he said, leaning forward a little and speaking in a measured tone. You planned everything, messaged them, met them, and developed connections with them while returning home to me and our daughter. Don't act like it just happened, I shouted, my voice shaking. Stop making excuses and insulting me with them. I would rather not hurt you, he said, letting out a deep breath. I was devastated by that sentence. You would rather not hurt me? You were cheating on me for 2 years, Brandon. You were pretending to build a future with me while actually building one with someone else. And you think this wasn't going to hurt? I laughed bitterly. We haven't been happy for a while, he said, averting his eyes and clenching his jaw. The traditional rationale was there. No, I firmly stated. You haven't been happy. Instead of talking to me, ending things, or being honest, you chose to lie. You made me feel crazy. You made me doubt myself. You used our daughter as a shield. And worst of all, you gave me the impression that we were still a team. I didn't feel sorry for him even though his eyes began to well up. Not now. Silently, I said, I'm going. He raised his head abruptly and said, What? I'm done doing this. I deserve better. Our daughter deserves better. I've already talked to a lawyer. I have a plan. His face flashed with panic. You're just going to take her away from me? He asked. No, I replied. I will ensure that she has both parents, but she will not be raised in a lie-filled home. And I will not allow her to believe that this is the definition of love. For once, he found himself speechless. I got up and went to the living room, where I got my diary from behind the bookshelf and gave him the folded paper of the night I determined I could no longer pretend. After opening it and reading a few lines, he put it down. He had trembling hands. I didn't care. I said, I'm telling you what's happening, and I'm not asking for permission. He swallowed hard and nodded slowly, saying, I never meant for it to get this far. I really looked at him one final time, and I could see him well. This is not the man I love. However, he had decided to become a man. I understand, I continued quietly, but you allowed it, and you now have to deal with that. I turned around and left, and I didn't turn around this time. After 2 weeks, I carefully let out my breath and closed the trunk of my car. My daughter's toys were already waiting for her in her new room, smaller, quieter, but ours, just the two of us. We packed the final box and left the last drawer empty. Perhaps he realized it was too late. Perhaps he finally saw the truth was more than infidelity, for Brandon had watched me pack in silence without arguing or pleading. It had to do with safety, trust, and the type of woman and mother I wished to be. I wanted our daughter's new beginning to feel like an adventure rather than an escape, so she was with my mom that day so she wouldn't have to watch me leave. I found a simple apartment with 2 bedrooms, flimsy walls, and no backyard, but it was safe, clean, and mine, ours. Since I still hadn't sorted out the overhead lighting, we sat on the floor of the living room eating dinner by candlelight on the first night after unpacking her clothing and making grilled cheese in a borrowed skillet. With crumbs on her cheeks, she gazed up at me and uttered, Are we going on a picnic, Mommy? Through the knot in my throat, I grinned and said, Yes, baby, it was truly a special moment. Just us girls. Unaware of the war one had just escaped to get us there. She cheered and laughed. And I had a profound realization at that same moment. She only needed a calm existence. Not a perfect one. I woke up the following morning to sunlight streaming in through another window. There was no deceit, no secret messages, and no acting. All I needed was a peaceful place to begin my recovery. I still experience difficult days and nights when I cry after she goes to bed, and times when the burden of being a single mother overwhelms me, leaving me questioning whether I can ever fully recover. However, when I wake up and see her face with her little hand reaching for mine, I realize I made the proper decision. Leaving was a sign of strength, not weakness. Choose self respect over fear, truth over comfort, and serenity over chaos. That's perseverance. That is increasing. I want to share this with anyone listening right now who is feeling hopeless, afraid, or broken. Waiting until you're ready is not necessary. You don't need to know everything. The first step is all you need to do. Even if your heart breaks, even if your voice falters, you must persevere. At the other end of your fear lies the life you deserve. And you will eventually look back and see, leaving wasn't the end. It was just the start.